The accusation didn't come with shouting. It came quietly, like a slow poison slipped into a cup, silent, deadly, impossible to ignore. The baby was only 9 days old, still fragile, still learning the world, still clinging to a heartbeat for comfort. The air in the room smelled of warm milk and exhaustion, soft blankets, and the tenderness of new life. But none of that soft him. He stood at the foot of the bed, expression carved from something colder than stone. His eyes didn't rest on the child with wonder or pride. They scanned with suspicion, calculation. And when the words finally left his mouth, they landed heavier than anything seen or felt before. This is not my child. Not a question. Not confusion. A sentence. A verdict. A betrayal. The world tilted. The walls breathed differently. The room shrank around the new reality he tried to force into existence. There was no logic behind his words. No evidence. No moment in time that justified the cruelty he unleashed. Yet he spoke with the confidence of someone who had been preparing this line long before the baby ever opened their eyes. His voice didn't tremble. It sharpened. You know what you did. That was the moment everything broke. The baby shifted softly in small arms, unaware of the damage he was doing with each word. There had been arguments before, cold silences, distant nights, and unexplained disappearances. But nothing compared to the depth of this accusation. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. It was erasure. A deliberate attempt to strip away identity, dignity, and motherhood in one blow. He didn't look at the baby again. He looked at the woman he betrayed as if seeing an enemy standing in his house. The next words cut deeper. You're not staying here. Shock didn't come. Not instantly. It arrived slowly, settling like frost on skin, creeping into every part of the body. There was no confrontation yet, just disbelief that a man who once promised protection could turn so vicious in the most vulnerable moment of a life. The child whimpered, a soft newborn cry that should have melted even the coldest heart. But he barely flinched. Instead, he took a step back, distancing himself not only physically, but emotionally, morally, humanly. We're done, he said. Take your things and leave. Leave with a 9-day-old baby. Leave the home where promises were made. Leave the man who had held that same child just days ago. Leave as if nothing had been shared, as if no vows were spoken, as if love had been rewritten overnight. The cruelty didn't come from the accusation alone. It came from the way he stood there, arms crossed, jaw set, unwavering in his decision. He didn't question. He didn't argue. He declared, as though he'd been waiting for this moment, as though the betrayal he claimed had existed in his mind long before its accusation. The calmness in his tone made everything clearer than any shouting ever could. He wanted them gone. He had been planning it. He needed a justification, and the baby, innocent, helpless, became his shield, his excuse, his weapon. And behind him, through the doorway, shapes began to appear. His family, faces cold, eyes narrowed, arms folded with quiet agreement. They didn't ask why. They didn't question his cruelty. They didn't blink at the sight of a newborn being pushed out into the world without a home. They simply stood behind him, united in a silence that stung more deeply than words ever could. One sentence sealed everything. We support him. Support him. Support his lie. Support his cruelty. Support his decision to throw out a mother and her newborn. Something inside hardened, not from hatred, but from truth. The truth that this man wasn't confused or afraid. He was prepared. He had built a story where he was the victim, where responsibility could be erased, where compassion had no place. The betrayal wasn't born that morning. It simply revealed itself fully. And standing on the other side of his accusation holding a child still learning to breathe. The quiet decision formed not from anger, but from the clarity that survival would lead to something far more powerful, because accusations can break trust, but they can also build resolve, and his cruelty became the first step toward the revenge he never saw coming. The moment came faster than breath could steady. One accusation turned into a command, and that command into a shove dressed as indifference. The man who once held the newborn with calculating gentleness now stood at the doorway with a posture that belonged to a stranger, rigid, cold, untouchable. There was no apology in his eyes, no hesitation in his hands, no flicker of humanity left in him. He repeated the order as if it were nothing more than a simple request. Take your things and get out. The newborn stirred, tiny fingers curling against the blanket, unaware that the world it had just entered was already turning cruel. There should have been a moment, just one, where compassion overtook anger, where a father's instinct silenced whatever lies he had built in his mind. But nothing came. No softness, no remorse, only dismissal. His family gathered behind him, forming a silent wall of agreement. Their eyes reflected judgment rather than concern, suspicion rather than reason. None of them looked at the newborn. None offered comfort or question. They simply waited, as though removing a mother and her child from their lives was as routine as closing a door. He stepped aside, not to help, not to reconsider, but to clear a path. Leave, he said again. Now. The baby let out a small cry, its voice thin and fragile in the tense silence. The sound didn't reach him. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look. Instead, he exhaled with irritation, the way someone reacts to a minor inconvenience. Not the destruction of his own family. She gathered what little she could, a small bag of essentials. The blanket wrapped carefully around the newborn's tiny body, and the last remnants of strength left after childbirth. Moving toward the door felt like walking through water, every step heavy with disbelief, exhaustion, and a heartbreak too large to process. But the moment the threshold was crossed, he slammed the door, hard, final, unmistakably intentional. The sound echoed through the hallway, vibrating through the baby's soft cry, sealing them both into a cold world that felt far too harsh for such a fragile moment in time. The slam wasn't just a door closing. It was the end of illusions, the end of trust, the end of the version of him she had once hoped was real. The cold air outside bit sharply against skin still recovering from birth. The newborn whimpered at the sudden change in temperature, its body curling instinctively toward warmth that no longer had a home to return to. The street was quiet, unnaturally so, as if the world had paused just long enough to absorb the cruelty of what had happened. A mother with a 9-day-old baby standing outside her own home, banished by the man who promised. Protection is a sight that forces truth into clarity. There were no misunderstandings left to cling to, no excuses that could soften the blow. No love strong enough to rewrite what had just been done. He didn't hesitate. He didn't question. He didn't care. The child he denied, the life he rejected, the home he ruined. His choices showed everything about the man he truly was. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, drawn by the noise, but none stepped outside. Maybe out of shock, maybe out of discomfort, maybe because some things are too painful for bystanders to involve themselves in. The silence surrounding the moment only deepened the weight of what had been lost. Walking away wasn't strength. It was survival. Every step down the path felt wrong and necessary at the same time. The newborn's breaths were soft and shaky, too new to understand the coldness of the world, too innocent to carry the burden of being unwanted by the man whose blood flowed through them. But with each step away from the house, a strange clarity began to settle. Pain didn't disappear, but it shifted, becoming something sharper, something steadier. something that knew this moment, as cruel as it was, would one day become the beginning of something stronger, because being thrown out with a newborn may break the heart, but it also exposes the truth of everyone involved, and in that truth, something unshakable begins to form. His family stood there long before the decision was spoken aloud. They didn't gather suddenly or by accident. They positioned themselves exactly where they wanted to be, behind him, beside him, around him, forming a wall that left no space for reason, no opening for compassion. Their faces carried the kind of expression that required practice, cold, unblinking, judgmental. Not one emotion suggested shock, not one eye softened at the sight of a newborn, not one hand trembled at the cruelty unfolding right in front of them. They knew. They had always known. Their silence wasn't confusion. It was approval. Not one protest left their lips when he accused his own blood. Not one gasp. Not one question. They didn't ask how he could claim such a thing. They didn't look at the baby and see innocence. They didn't see a mother trembling from childbirth and pain. Instead, they crossed their arms, exchanged glances filled with satisfaction, and let him speak for all of them. His mother's lips tightened into a smug, bitter line, the kind that looked far too comfortable on her face. She had never welcomed the idea of someone else sharing space in her son's life. Her voice, when she finally let it slip in a whisper only loud enough to wound, carried poison. I always knew something was wrong. Not with her son. With the woman holding his child, his father didn't say a word. His silence wasn't neutrality, it was dominance. The kind of silence used to enforce decisions rather than question them. He stared long enough to make discomfort feel like guilt, long enough to let the accusation sink deeper than intended. His hands remained in his pockets, shoulders squared, a quiet message that backed his son regardless of truth. The sisters stood slightly behind them, whispering into their mother's ear, her eyes scanning every detail of the baby with a coldness that didn't belong in the presence of a newborn. She didn't look with curiosity or kindness. She studied like someone seeking flaws to justify cruelty. She doesn't even look like him, she murmured. Lies, but lies spoken softly enough often become truth in families, built on ego instead of love. The brother leaned into the wall with a smirk so small it barely appeared on his face, but enough to reveal satisfaction. He had never bothered hiding his resentment. The sight of someone he could finally deem unworthy seemed to soothe him more than the presence of a child. Their whispers weren't chaotic. They were coordinated, controlled, unified. Their silence wasn't the absence of voice. It was the presence of agreement. No one stepped forward to defend. No one told him to calm down. No one suggested reason or compassion. When the door opened and he ordered the mother and the 9-day-old baby to leave, not a single pair of eyes widened in shock. They didn't expect him to reconsider. They didn't try to stop him. They didn't move. They simply watched the struggle to gather belongings with hands still raw from childbirth. Watched the newborn's tiny face scrunch with cold. Watched a family being torn apart while standing united in their own cruelty. His mother stood with her chin lifted high, pride shimmering in her eyes. The father nodded subtly, giving silent confirmation of approval. The siblings exchanged glances that carried unspoken victory. It was a scene of triumph for them, not tragedy, because this wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was planned, supported, encouraged. Behind their disapproval, behind their coldness, behind their silence lived something uglier: jealousy, control, fear of losing influence over the man they raised. And so they built a narrative long before the child ever took its first breath. A narrative where they were the protectors and the mother was the intruder. A narrative that needed a reason to push her out. They didn't need truth. They needed only an opportunity. And when he accused the baby of being someone else's, They seized it with open arms and closed hearts. The final moment, the slam of the door behind them, wasn't just his doing. It was theirs. Their silence pushed that door closed. Their agreement kept it shut. But the one thing they all failed to understand was simple. Silence doesn't erase truth. It only delays the moment it becomes impossible to ignore. The truth has a way of rising, even when someone tries to bury it so deeply it should never be found. And after being thrown out with a newborn, the shock eventually gave way to clarity that makes silence sharper, observation keener, memory unforgiving. It was only then that the pieces began to fall into place, revealing a pattern far too precise to be an emotional outburst or a moment of confusion. His accusation wasn't born that day. He had been preparing for it. The first clues surfaced in the form of messages once saved, hidden, but never deleted. Some men delete evidence out of guilt. He kept it out of arrogance. They weren't messages from a lover, not at first. They were conversations with a friend, someone he claimed was helping him with work, someone he said barely mattered. But the tone carried something darker than infidelity. They discussed finances, plans, dates, and one message stood out like a knife left on the kitchen counter. Once the child comes, make your move. It's the only time she'd be too weak to fight back. Too weak to fight back. Words typed casually, as if orchestrating the removal of a mother and child was simply a task on a list. The next clue came from the bank statements. Numbers that never aligned with the story he told. Money he claimed to be saving disappeared. Payments labeled as consultation fees grew larger with each passing month. Transfers to his family's accounts occurred with suspicious timing. Purchases made at stores he never visited with her. A hotel room reserved during the 7th month of pregnancy. When he said he was out of town for business, the receipts didn't tell a story of adultery. They told a story of constructing a narrative strong enough to sever ties, erase guilt, and place blame entirely on someone who had no idea. The ground was shifting under her feet, but the details hidden in his behavior during the pregnancy were the hardest to ignore. They weren't obvious then. They looked like stress, worry, or exhaustion at the time. Now they look like strategy. He grew distant. Not emotionally, but practically. He attended fewer doctor appointments. He refused to discuss future plans. He avoided conversations about names, baby clothes, or nursery decorations. He stopped touching the belly altogether. Whenever the topic of paternity came up in casual conversations with others, he tensed. And the tension wasn't fear, it was anticipation. He waited for the moment he could weaponize his doubts. He built a story brick by brick, layering innuendos and vague comments about timelines and trust issues. He even planted seeds among his family, whispering suspicions that seemed harmless until the day they used them as daggers. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The quiet phone calls that ended abruptly when someone walked into the room. The texts he answered with a sudden seriousness. The nights he claimed to be overwhelmed and slept in another room. The times he stared at the baby's ultrasound pictures with a blank expression instead of joy. The most damning evidence surfaced only weeks later, a document left behind in a rush. A drafted legal note. In it, he outlined his intention to deny paternity unless proof was shown otherwise. He had written it months before the baby was born. Months. He didn't plan to question the child. He planned to erase it. The betrayal wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't emotional. It was administrative, calculated. Cold. He had been designing an escape route long before the first contraction ever struck. His accusation wasn't shock, it was strategy. A plan he fully believed would free him from financial responsibility, emotional accountability, and the life he claimed to build. But buried beneath all his lies was something darker than selfishness. Fear of a truth he tried to hide even from himself. because every message, every financial inconsistency, every suspicious behavior pointed toward one truth he never expected to be revealed. He wasn't trying to prove the child wasn't his. He was terrified the world would discover it absolutely was, and that truth, once uncovered, would become the beginning of his downfall. Survival has a way of reshaping someone from the inside out. It doesn't roar or thrash or flood the world with sound. It settles quietly, like a second heartbeat. After being thrown out with a newborn, after facing accusations designed to erase both motherhood and dignity, something far stronger than despair began to take root. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't revenge at first. It was survival, pure, instinctive, unyielding. Every tear that threatened to fall hardened into clarity instead. Every moment of pain forged sharper awareness. Every memory of his cruelty became a brick in the foundation of something far more powerful. There was no room left for begging, no space for pleading, no desire to reason with the man who planned his betrayal long before the child existed. The first step wasn't a plan. It was simply standing back up, holding the newborn close, feeling the tiny heartbeat pressed against chest. A realization formed with chilling precision. This child deserved better. Better than a father who crafted lies. Better than a family who watched cruelty with crossed arms. Better than a life built on a foundation of poison. Survival turned into purpose. Purpose turned into strategy. Piece by piece. The plan began not with vengeance, but with reclaiming what was stolen. Safety, truth, identity. The messages he hid. Screenshotted, saved, backed up in places he would never find. The bank inconsistencies, documented, printed, organized with dates and explanations that exposed everybody. Financial lie he crafted. The suspicious behavior during the pregnancy, written down with painful accuracy, the excuses, the disappearances, the nights spent away. Not emotional recollections, but factual records strong enough to strike at the heart of his false narrative and the cruel eviction with a newborn. Witnesses saw, phones recorded, neighbors whispered. Word spread faster than he expected. He believed control belonged to the loudest voice. He forgot that the strongest power lies with the quietest one. While he gloated in the safety of his family's approval, the walls around his lies began to crack slowly, silently. He had built confidence on the assumption that pain makes people weak, that shock blinds them, that betrayal breaks them. But betrayal can do something else entirely. It can teach. It can strengthen. It can awaken. Survival sharpened into revenge the way winter transforms into ice, gradual, inevitable, unstoppable. Not the fiery revenge of someone screaming for justice, but the cold, calculated kind that grows in silence, waits for the right moment, and strikes only when victory is guaranteed. The first real step was truth, a truth he never expected to face. Denna doesn't lie. But men like him do not for vengeance, not for validation, but for protection. A test was done quietly, discreetly, professionally. The results came like a whisper that carried the weight of 1,000 storms. The child was his, unmistakably, biologically, indisputably, completely. The moment the truth settled, survival blossomed into something no cruelty could stop. Certainty. Certainty strong enough to cut through every lie he had built. Certainty powerful enough to turn his own weapons back onto him. The next steps were taken with the patience of someone who had learned the cost of trusting the wrong man. Every piece of evidence collected. Every inconsistency prepared. Every plan organized with the precision of someone who had lost everything but refused to stay broken. He expected silence. He expected disappearance. He expected the wounds he caused to paralyze their victim. What he never expected was for survival to become strategy. He never expected calmness. He never expected patience. He never expected the truth to be sharper than his lies. Most of all, he never expected someone he deemed weak to become the reason his carefully crafted world began its slow, unstoppable collapse, because survival teaches something revenge never could. The strongest retaliation isn't born from anger, it's born from the determination to rise when someone else tried to bury you. And in that rising, his downfall had already begun. Truth doesn't explode, it seeps. It begins as a tremor, then a whisper, then a force strong enough to split open everything a liar builds to protect himself. And when the truth about him finally rose from silence into daylight, it didn't just prove a point. It destroyed the entire version of himself he had spent years performing. It started with the DNA report, a thin envelope, a single sheet of paper, cold, factual, undeniable. There was no dramatic presentation, no shouting, no courtroom theatrics. It was delivered quietly, placed gently before the people who once swore they would defend him no matter what. His family sat in a circle, the same posture of judgment they once used against a mother holding a 9-day-old baby. But this time, the judgment wasn't directed at her. This time, they stared at him. The father lifted the page first. His eyes scanned the numbers, percentages, markers, identifiers all pointing toward one truth. The child he denied, the baby he threw out, the life he rejected was undeniably his. There was no gray area, no room for interpretation, no angle for manipulation. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't protective silence anymore. It was the silence of betrayal hitting the betrayer. He opened his mouth to speak, but the mother held up a hand. Not in defense of him, she did it to stop him from embarrassing himself further. For the first time, her voice wavered. "You lied to us." The words struck him harder than any accusation ever thrown at her. He tried to counter with explanations long rehearsed, smooth lies crafted to survive scrutiny, but the rest of the evidence waited on the table like witnesses ready to testify. The bank records, the hidden messages, the drafted note denying paternity months before the child was born, the hotel receipts, the suspicious withdrawals, the neighbors who saw him whispering to someone in the driveway the night before the accusation took place. Every secret he buried surfaced with perfect timing, each one fitting neatly into place like a puzzle he never expected anyone to solve. He shifted in his seat, swallowed hard, ran a hand through his hair. His voice cracked beneath the weight of exposure. "I was confused," he insisted. "I made a mistake. She pushed me. I was stressed. I didn't mean, but excuses don't survive truth. Not this level of truth." His sister slammed the table. "You planned this," she hissed. "You lied to all of us." His brother stood up abruptly, pacing, muttering curses under his breath. He had believed him, defended him, supported him, and now he felt like a fool manipulated by the person he trusted most. But the mother's reaction was the most devastating. "You threw out your own child," she whispered, voice trembling. "A baby." He reached for her, but she stepped away as if contact might burn her. The walls around him began to cave, not physically, but emotionally, socially, reputationally. He had built his identity on being the dutiful son, the loyal husband, the responsible man. But each new revelation stripped another layer off that image until nothing remained but the truth he tried to bury. The father's disappointment dropped heavily across the room. His voice, always powerful, now cracked with disgust. "You denied your own blood to protect a lie. You don't deserve this family's loyalty." He staggered back, as though the words themselves had weight. "What was I supposed to do?" he asked, voice breaking. "I was scared. I didn't know how to fix it." "You didn't try to fix it," his mother said. "You tried to escape it." His world continued to shrink as the truth pressed closer, suffocating every attempt to rewrite the narrative. The more he tried to speak, the more hollow his words sounded. Every lie echoed back at him, mocking him, exposing him, crushing him. And the child, the tiny innocent life he rejected, became the center of the room, a symbol of purity against his corruption, a reminder of everything he destroyed with his own hands. The irony was cruel. The very proof he used to push them away became the exact proof that shattered him. Neighbors began whispering. His workplace questioned his absence. His reputation sank beneath rumors and truth spreading faster than he could hide it. Even the woman he confided in, the one who encouraged his betrayal, stopped answering his calls once she realized chaos had reached his doorstep. He was alone, utterly, completely, devastatingly, and as the last of his defenses crumbled, as his family turned their backs one by one, as the truth settled like dust on the ruins of his pride, he finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. He destroyed himself the moment he denied his own child, and the child he tried to erase became the truth that erased him. If this story gripped you, moved you, or left you wanting more of the truth he never saw coming, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More betrayals will unravel, more secrets will rise, and more stories of quiet revenge will shake the ground beneath those who caused the pain. Stay with us, your next twist arrives soon.